Hey, FrSky people, this is FrSky Steve. This is going to be a mini-series. This is part one of a two-part mini-series covering the FrSky Stabilized Receiver guide. This is covering the whole setup of the stabilized receivers. I will tell you that I'm not a stabilized receiver person per se, but once I started playing with the FrSky Stabilized Receivers, I started putting them into like all the planes I built from that point on. They are really exceptional. It is a premium experience with a very clunky setup. I am apologizing in advance. I'm sorry to put you through this. It's not that I hate you, but this is something that we're working on. We want to make the experience better for everybody. For now, there's just a lot going on with the Ethos and the updates, and we had a lot of new receivers within the last 2 years. We've had, well, when I first started playing with the tandem transmitter, there were no tandem receivers, and then all of a sudden over the last couple of years we had quite a few tandem receivers, and then in a very short period of time every single tandem receiver had a counterpart, with the exception of one, that is the TDMX does not have a counterpart, but all the other ones, the standard TD receivers, have a TD-SR receiver associated with them. So we have stabilization on 6, 10, 12, and 18 channels. They're brilliant, they're worth the money, and it is worth the setup. First and foremost, I will tell you that if you buy these stabilized receivers and you think you're going to throw them into your plane and just go flying with them, unfortunately it's not going to work that way. The good news is that they are turned on. The bad news, they're not going to do anything remotely what you want to do, and you're going to get very frustrated, and you will not be able to control them until you have the Lewis script installed. So until you're ready to sit down and actually go through a complete setup of your stabilized receiver, the best thing to do is put it off to the side and use another receiver until you're ready to sit down and follow the steps here. And I will, in this process, describe to you how to turn off the stabilization system in case you just would like to use it as a normal receiver until you're ready to follow along. Okay, so this talks about, it's about one night to follow along with the guide, follow along with it, figure out what's going on, watch the videos, maybe a little bit longer, depends on who you are and what you're doing. But I'm going to take you through the basic steps here. We're not going to dwell on these steps. I just kind of give you the overview of what to expect. And this is just so you to get your head wrapped around what you're about to embark on. You're going to need to find the battery, and you need to do this outside your plane. So you need to figure out how to power up your receiver. You need to register and bind the receiver. And then one of the first things you want to do is update your receiver, the firmware on the receiver, and also at the same time update the firmware on your transmitter. So if you have one of the latest versions of Ethos suite, it will go through and it will update your transmitter, your internal module, and also your bootloader. So once you have all that set up, you should be good to go. And then we're going to build your model file, and I am assuming you are on Ethos 1.5 at this point because it is so much easier. You're not going to be, when you see my demonstrations from this point on, they're not for Ethos 1.4.17, unfortunately. We're starting to move on from there, and so all the videos I'm making now are for Ethos 1.5.x and beyond. So because the building your model file takes some time, that's the next video in the series, and we cover things really nicely in that video. We're going to calibrate your gyro, and this is the first time you're going to use a Lewis script, and for some people this is a learning curve because they've never downloaded and unzipped something, and because they haven't done that, you will need to learn how to do that. There's actually tools now in Ethos Suite which can make that a little bit easier for you, but this is a requirement. You have to have the Lewis scripts installed properly on your transmitter. In the next video I'll show you where you would find them. When you go through the calibration process, if things aren't working out correctly, it typically is because you have to read the words, not really try to look at the diagram. So when they say pins up, pins down, you got to follow along with that, and I have a couple videos showing you exactly how to do it. It's pretty straightforward. Where people usually go wrong is in the last two steps. They have the receiver turned with the writing turned away from them. It should be towards them. After you did all this, you're going to mount the receiver in your plane. You're going to first and foremost go into outputs and unreverse all your servos. It is highly important that you do not have any servos reversed. It doesn't matter if the control surfaces go in the wrong direction. If you don't have them unreversed, your setup is not going to be correct, and you're going to have a plane that's not stabilizing correctly. So we want to make sure everything's unreversed. Then we're going to go on to a couple more Lewis scripts. In case you can't get into the SRX stab menu or stable, what you'll need to do is go into SRX basic and make sure everything is turned on. You have to go to open and just make sure that the IMU mode is enabled, and then everything should be good to go after that point. Then what we're going to do is go into the SRX stab menu, select open. You should see everything go from grayed out to being turned on, and we're going to go a few steps down and we're going to find the self check. And this is perhaps the most crucial step in the entire experience. This will make or break you. And where people go wrong, and I've had so many people call me and like, dude, my rudder doesn't work, or this doesn't work, or that doesn't work. What you have to do is you have to, well, I'll put it this way. What would be ideal is if you can see that light on your receiver. That light will start to, when you hit the self-check, you click enable, and right away it will say disable, so don't worry about that. But if you were to look at the light, you'll see that it will start to change. Sometimes they change color, sometimes they change the speed, or the pattern of the way that it blinks. And so you need to follow along with that. Unfortunately, a lot of times your receiver's buried in your plane and you can't see it. So what I tell people to do is you don't touch your sticks. You count as soon as you hit self-check enable. You say 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000. Wait a little bit. Then you move your sticks, and the proper way to do it is from center, you move it to the far left, and you hold it for about 1/10 of a second. Smoothly go back to center, hold it for 1/10 of a second, move to the right side all the way. You're making a plus pattern, and you hold it there for 1/10 of a second, go back to the middle, hold for 1/10 of a second, and you follow this pattern until you finish the plus on the right stick. And on the left stick, you have it all the way down, so throttle all the way off. And you start from the middle, hold to the left for 1/10 of a second, go back to the middle, hold for 1/10 of a second, go to the right, hold for 1/10 of a second, go back to the middle. Now, you let go, and within a few seconds, you should see the servo start to dance. If you do not see your servo start to dance, that means you've something has gone wrong. Or what will happen sometimes is when you're in the middle of trying to do this, you're slow, and you'll see the servo start to dance before you're finished. When you've done this right, if that's the case, if it starts to dance without you finishing, you have to start over again. When you get this right, what will happen is all your control surfaces will work to full deflection. It should be what you're familiar with. And when you have that, you're good to go. Then steps 9 and 10 are pretty much the same thing. You're going to check the movement of your control surfaces, and you make sure your stabilizer works in the right direction. What we're trying to do is you need to put the gains all the way up. You need to put the plane into self-level mode, and that's one of the switch positions. It's the opposite end of off. And when you move the left wing up, your aileron should go up. When you move the right wing up, that aileron should go up as well. Now, if they don't, you'll have to reverse them. I show you how to do that in the next video. When you move the nose up on your plane, the tail goes down, and so does your elevator. And you have to make sure that when the tail goes up, that the elevator goes up as well, and that is the correct movement. Yaw is harder to find because you have to do some quick jerks to the left and the right, but you should see as you jerk to the right, the rudder should move to the right as well. After a while, you get pretty good at this. What's important is that you have to absolutely make sure that these things work, and if they're not going the right direction, then you have to reverse them, and I'll show you how to do that in the next video. And after that, you can go back in and you can reverse the servos. If they're moving the wrong directions, this is the point where you go to outputs in the model menu and reverse the direction of the servos. It's okay to do this. And the very last thing I do in these setups is I take the plane, I put the nose up somewhere between 3 and 5 degrees, and by doing this, what happens is it will fool the plane into thinking that it was gaining altitude. And the reason why you want to do this is because otherwise it will fly level, and by flying level, it means there's inefficiencies in your airfoil design and you will lose altitude. So what you'll notice is you're in the stabilized mode and you're either holding up your elevator or you're watching your plane sink over time. So you need to fool it by moving up about 3 to 5 degrees and everything's perfect. Okay, so we're going to move on now, and we've covered quite a bit so far, and I wanted to point out a few things here. This is where you'd find the downloads for your Lewis scripts, and this is where you find the downloads for your firmware. This is, go a little further down here. There's Bob. Hey, Bob. All right. There is the calibration. We've discussed this already. This explains everything. We're talking about plugging everything in. This was a mess before. You had to make all these channels, and they had to be in this order. Now, in Ethos 1.5, it automatically does this for you for the receiver, which is brilliant. This is a pro tip. You probably don't use it unless you use a second bank. And we talked about the second bank right there. And if you're not using a second bank, you need to go in and turn everything else. I talked about the self-check right here, and kind of the things I already discussed with you. There was one thing we went by, which was that there's essentially 3 different modes when it comes to stabilized receivers. So there's an advanced mode, there is a basic mode, and a quick mode. The quick mode, essentially what it does is it only provides 3 flight modes. It's stabilization off, stabilization on, and self-level. Now, there is an option to put a second set of switches on for your stabilization system, and that one will turn on 2 more flight modes. One is called knife edge, and the other one is 3D hover. And kind of have to have the right planes for these things. Well, for the 3D hover in particular. What I would say is that those look like really neat little things to play with, but the switch positions are different, and you really have to dial in on those switch positions. I typically tell people just to set up the quick mode only. Let's not play with the basic mode with those stabilization, with the hover and the 3D. And then the advanced mode, we haven't really been working on that very much. That is coming, and that's going to be a major, really cool update, but people have asked me to make videos. Unfortunately, there's nothing to make videos about. And this pretty much covers the entire guide. You should be in pretty good shape after this. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I do thank you for watching, and have yourself a great day.